Kaiden, I can never thank you and your friend enough. Finally, I will get to live my dream and see all the wonders Skyrim has to offer.
Good luck to you, Erik. I hope you find whatever it is that you're looking for.
I hope that you find the home you have always wanted as well.
Aye. I think perhaps we both are having a chance at making our dreams a reality here.
More questions about Kaiden, I'm guessing. Kaiden was always very protective. Brynyard used to get frustrated with him because he would always intervene or try if he saw someone being hurt. Used to tell him to be careful not to bite off more than he can chew. And if he did, to be prepared to choke on the bite. Pretty much never. As for the privy, I was chopping firewood when they came back around. Didn't realize he was even there until he asked about my bruises. It was hot, so I had taken off my shirt and I had a few bad marks on my back. I had gotten in his way and upset Lemkill the day before. Then couldn't dodge his boot fast enough. Kaiden knew right away who had done it, as he'd intervened before when Lemkill had tried to give me a thrashing. Said he was going to teach. Well, he used a lot of colorful metaphors to describe Lemkill. He said it was time he had learned how it felt to be helpless. He slipped an herb into Lemkill's stew that night, one that causes stomach issues. Then we waited behind the privy. Didn't take long. He'd used probably a good 3 times the normal dose. Said the, shit deserved to shit himself. Pardon my language, friend. Lemkill came running to the privy soon as we knew he was in the middle of his business. Kaiden grabbed the privy and began to shake it. That was when I began yelling, "Giant!" Lemkill ran out and made it about a dozen steps before tripping over his pants. He fell face first in the dirt. He ended up just trying to crawl away, still tangled up in his pants while screaming for help. He was chased by one for trying to steal one of its tribute cows a season or 2 before. Took a glancing blow and was almost killed. Ever since, he's been terrified of them. Worst part was the herbs hadn't worn off yet. That was a sight and smell I could have lived without, to be sure. All right, then. I can try to answer. However, I didn't interact with him very much. He was always rather intimidating. Except on the occasions he had some ale at night. Then he would tell the best tales. Good enough he could have been a skald. I don't think he was always as on edge as he was when we knew him. I know those nights were always Kaiden's favorites. We would get together the next day and talk about the stories. Sadly, those nights didn't happen very often. I think my father knew Brynyard more. They talked a lot. Maybe he could answer your questions. Until next time.
Sorry. Of course, what can I do for you? Hunted and haunted. I used to be a soldier. War leaves its mark on you, changes you. Brynyard had seen things that would break a weaker man, and was haunted by shadows I cannot even begin to understand. However, he was a good man that did all he could for the boy. Of course, anytime.
Of course, friend. What would you like to know? Gruff mostly. Not unkind, though. He just seemed very on edge. He never relaxed. Even here. He would always be watching the road, and if he saw someone, he'd make Kaiden hide until he gave their signal it was clear. Bird calls. He would test Kaiden all the time on the different signals they had. If Kaiden heard the 3 calls of a crow, he'd have to drop what he was doing and hide. Usually when we were the most caught up in our fun, so I would just tag along. Sometimes the clear signal would come right away. More often than not, it didn't come for hours. There was once that we were stuck hiding in a thicket all night. Yes, all night. When the signal finally came, we were able to make it back here. We were both chewed up by insects and thorns, not to mention so hungry and thirsty. I went inside to get some food, but Kaiden didn't. Brynyard made Kaiden go chop wood for hours instead. He cut almost our entire season's need that day.
It is good to see you grown to a man.
Brynyard said he'd been sloppy trying to help me hide and given himself away. That this was the perfect time to learn how to work through his discomfort, because his life might depend on it someday. I said that same thing to Kaiden later. He said he should have been more careful, or we would have both been in danger. He just never seemed to get angry about any of it. I think he just really wanted to make Brynyard proud. He'd always get so happy when Brynyard told him, "Well done, lad." Like the nights with the stories, though, it didn't happen very often. I'd better get going.
If you need a meal or room, I've got both. Of course. What would you like to know?
I'm saving up for a new sword.
Sort of. All Brynyard ever said was that he had known Kaiden's parents and had promised his mother he'd protect him. He did not like to speak about them much. I gather the loss was too painful. Oh, well, I'm not sure a bodyguard would travel at night in the worst storm of the rainy season to fetch medicine. Let alone sit beside their bed for days, trying to sponge down the fever with no care for their own well-being. Kaiden doesn't know this, but when he was the sickest, I didn't think he'd make it through to morning. I heard a noise late that night, thought maybe Kaiden had passed, so I went to check. I found Brynyard holding him, just rocking and singing to him. Kept spooning tonics into his mouth, wiping him to try and take down the fever. The man looked up and saw me. I could tell he was crying. I let him be in peace and went back to bed. As I was leaving, I heard him say, "Fever has to break. Can't lose you, lad." So, yeah, I think he cared. A lot. More than he probably could show. People care in different ways. His was just a bit gruffer than most. Wasn't my place to spill Brynyard's secrets.
Kaiden, I was wondering if you have any advice for me before I set off on my first adventure.
Aye, well now. Let me see. Keep your blade sharp. Don't be leaving food out when you're near camp. Never drink more than one ale at a new inn. Don't believe anything a tavern lass says. And most importantly, check which way the wind blows before you fucking piss.
I already learned that last one the hard way.
Everyone does, my friend.
About our mutual friend, I imagine. Well, yes, quite often, actually. Growing up without a mother was something we had in common because mine passed when I was a babe as well. So, we had many conversations about that over the years. He was always rather desperate to know about her, unfortunately. Brynyard was never very forthcoming. Would always tell him he'd answer all his questions when it was time for him to know. Sort of. He said that sometimes knowledge made you stronger, but sometimes all it would do is make you a target. When he was sure it would do the former, he would share. Until then seemed worried it would only bring about the latter. Thought of something else you would like to know? Well, in a way. It isn't the sword he normally used, if that's what you're asking. No, he kept it wrapped up so none of it showed, and it was protected from the weather. Always wore it attached to his pack, with a special set of straps made to secure it tightly. Once when he was out hunting, Kaiden and I snuck into the room to look at it. He told me he was almost never allowed to touch it. Could only look at it, or help with the care of it, when Brynyard was positive they were alone. Kaiden said that Brynyard always told him someday when he had earned it, then it would be his to wield. He told him that would be the day Kaiden's mother would have been proudest to see.